Good afternoon, boys and girls, and Mrs. Crawford here, back with you this afternoon for third grade social studies, but everybody can join in. Can you believe we only have 2 lessons left together? And we're finally getting to the point where Missouri is going to become a state. We started with Missouri's first people coming over the Bering Strait during the Ice Age 18,000 years ago, and all the way up to westward expansion and Lewis and Clark and heading out west in the United States, growing and expanding. And so that's what we are going to talk about today. The United States expanding, with Missouri trying to become a state. But let's start with our land acknowledgement statement. Okay, so here we go. We would like to acknowledge the ancestral territory of the Mississippian mound builders and the Osage. It is important to recognize not only their land, but also their elders of the past, the present, and the future. They were unfairly removed from the land we live on now. We will continue to learn about Native people and other cultures. So let's begin. Okay, so you're probably wondering, what does Missouri, here's our flag, and a balance scale from school have to do with each other? Well, I'll tell you, there's some balancing that had to happen. But before we get into that, I want you to listen to this story. And it's about the word compromise. It is Jennifer's turn to cook dinner for her family. Jennifer wants to cook spaghetti and meatballs for dinner, and she wants to make banana splits for dessert. Her mother wants her to include a vegetable. You know how moms are. Her brother wants green beans if he has to eat vegetables. Her sister hates green beans. Jennifer herself likes salad. Jennifer negotiates with her brother and sister to get them to agree. Her sister will compromise and agree to have a salad if and only if she can get walnuts on her banana split. And her brother will compromise and agree to a salad for dinner if Jennifer will also make garlic bread. They all agree, and their mom gives the seal of approval for dinner. The siblings have found a plan that works for everyone. So that is compromise. Let's take a look at our vocabulary for this week. We have the Missouri Compromise is our topic. We have the word compromise, which we hear from Jennifer's story. It means to settle a disagreement by agreeing that each side will give up or change some of their demands. Balance of power. Yes, balance. It's to have equal power to prevent one group from having all of the control. Okay? Statehood. That's what Missouri wanted. And that was to have the status of being a state, part of the United States, and having all of the rights and the responsibilities of being a state. Okay? Then we have 2 different types of states. We have a free state, which is a state where slavery was prohibited or was being phased out. So not every free state was actually free. They might have been at a point of phasing out slavery. And then we have slave states, and that's a state where slavery was legal. And then we have a person, Henry Clay. He was a representative from Kentucky who came up with the Missouri Compromise. So let's head back to this balance scale. At the time that Missouri was wanting to become a state, there were some things that had already happened. So we've got a little bit of background. There was this big war, War 1812. Believe it or not, we were fighting the British again. And we won. And we were now concentrating on growing our country. Remember, Lewis and Clark, Louisiana Purchase and Territory. After all of that, can you believe we fought a war? So we fought this war, and we had to decide what was going to happen with the territories and the states that would be carved out of them. Well, the first ships containing African slaves, or Africans who were being enslaved, had arrived in America about 1619. Remember, we talked about that in our very first weeks. And the slave trade had picked up in the 18th century. The expansion of cotton and other types of farming in the South required more and more labor, and more plantation owners turned to enslaving people, Black people, to fill their workloads because it was free labor. By the turn of the 19th century, outrage was growing over slavery, but primarily in northern states. And as more and more territories were applying to become states, the decision of whether those states would allow slavery was becoming a very important issue. So, one by one, states joined the Union. From 1816 to 1819, 2 northern states and 2 southern states joined the Union. The 2 northern states were Indiana and Illinois. They did not allow slavery. The 2 southern states, Alabama and Mississippi, did. So when Missouri came along and wanted to become a state, there were 11 free states, and what do you think is going to happen? 11 slave states. So we had a balance of power between the states and their representatives in Congress. In Congress, we're talking about the House of Representatives and the Senate together. So you had Missouri come up, and do we enter as a free state or do we enter as a slave state? Well, what would happen if we entered as a free state? You're right. The free states would have more power. But what if we entered then as a slave state? We already had slaves in Missouri. You're right. They would have more power. That became an issue. There were some things that the free states and the slave states had in common that they both wanted. Let's take a look at that on our Venn diagram. How do we keep the balance? That's the problem we're solving. So, what did each side want, and what was their common ground? Their first common ground was they wanted to maintain balance of power in Congress. Both sides wanted that. They also wanted new states to join the Union and for the U.S. to expand. But that's where the common ground ends. They wanted opposite things. As you know on the Venn diagram, what goes on the outside of the circle are the things that are the differences, the contrasting ideas. So let's take a look at a few of their contrasting ideas. Free states wanted an end to slavery in the United States. Slave states, slavery to continue legally throughout the United States. Definitely opposites. Let's look at their second opposing views. Free states wanted all runaway slaves to be allowed to stay in free northern states as free persons. Once you're free, you stay free. Sounds like Dred Scott, right? Slave states wanted the return of all runaway slaves to their owners. Third and final opposing views. Slave states wanted all new states carved out of the Louisiana Territory to be free states. And as you can imagine, slave states wanted all new states carved out of the Louisiana Territory to be slave states. Okay, so that gives us the problem. Now, what would be our solution? Okay, so we've got our problem. Now, let's see what the solutions were to fix this problem. The first solution came from Representative James Talmadge. Okay, let's get a little background on James Talmadge. See if you can make some connections between who he is and what his ideas are and why he might have those ideas. He was from New York State. He attached an amendment to Missouri's application for statehood. So amendment means to add something to a bill or piece of legislation. Okay, so there is our word statehood also. So this is what he proposed. No new slaves bought to or sold in Missouri after it became a state, and free all slaves born in Missouri up to the age of 25 after Missouri becomes a state. So he's saying here, no new slaves, no more selling slaves. They used to do slave auctions down at the old courthouse. So no more of that. And if you were age 0 up to age 25 when Missouri became a state, you were automatically free. And that meant they were hoping that there would be no more slavery because you wouldn't have children become slaves. So are you wondering, what about their parents or the adults over 25? No, they would still remain slaves. So thinking about who he is, New York State. Where is New York? Yeah, New York is a northern state. So his plan sounds like it's calling for the ending of slavery in Missouri. He could still enter as a slave state, but it just wouldn't remain. It would do the phasing out of slavery. Okay, so Missouri application for statehood and Talmadge's amendment was approved by the House of Representatives. Yay! The application and the amendment failed in the Senate. No. So we've got to try it again. Let's see the solution that came up and the person who came up with the solution. Okay, so Missouri Compromise, the solution. Let's try it again. We had Representative Henry Clay. So let's hear about his background and look at the compromise he came up with and see if there's some correlation between where he's from and who he is to his ideas about how Missouri could enter as a state. So, Representative Henry Clay was from Kentucky. He was Speaker of the House, which means he was the highest ranking person in the House of Representatives. He was like the boss of the House. And he is a slave owner. Okay? So keep that in mind as we go through his ideas for Missouri becoming a state. Let's look at this first one. I covered them up because it'd just be faster than trying to write them, right? So here's the first part of his solution, the Missouri Compromise. Missouri admitted as a slave state, and Maine would break off from Massachusetts and be admitted as a free state. Did you know that Maine was once a part of Massachusetts? All right, let's zoom in here to our map, and take a look. So Maine is this right here, and Massachusetts is this little area right here. And it used to be together. And so this would allow the people who were living in this part of Maine that was separate from Massachusetts, but part of Massachusetts, to start their own state. They would be free. And here is Missouri. There's our state. And we would be admitted as a slave state. Okay? So, Missouri. Oh, that's the free state. Maine and Missouri. Do we have a balance? Okay, it didn't end there. Let's look at another part of his plan. He decided that there should be a latitude line. You know, the lines that run east to west on a globe, and they're imaginary, right? A latitude line at 36 degrees and 30 feet. That is the southern border of Missouri. And divide all future states into free or slave states. So the line was, north of the line, you would be free. South of the line, you would be a slave state. Except for Missouri, because we were being entered as a slave state. So everything else, all the parts of the Louisiana Territory, all the parts that we ended up acquiring when we fought Mexico, for Texas and parts of California and New Mexico and Arizona, that line would determine free or slave. Alrighty? Another part. Nope, the plan doesn't end there. Northern abolitionists had to return runaway slaves back to owners, slave owners in the South. Whole fugitive slave law, but that's another part of history. I don't have time to teach you right now. And slavery would not be prohibited anywhere in the West. Wow. So, what do you think it is about Henry Clay's background that gave him the ideas for this? Yeah, he was a slave owner. And so he was trying to make sure that he and the other southern states would still get a little bit more on the end. But let's see if he succeeded at that. Let's take a look at what they wanted and what they got on both sides. Okay, so you remember our definition of compromise. It means that each side gets a little of what they want, gives a little of what they want, gives it away or gives it up, and they change a little of what they want. So let's see if that played out in our Missouri Compromise. So did each side get some of the things they wanted? Well, we know they both wanted balance of power in Congress. We would have 12 states and 12 states, is that okay? And new states to join the Union and the U.S. to expand. So they each got that. That gives them each 2. Okay, so does slavery continue legally in the United States? Yes, so that's 3 for slave states. Do they get all their slaves returned to them? That's 4 things they got. All new states carved out of the Louisiana Territory are slave states. Did they get that? No. Okay. Are we able to end slavery in the United States? No. All runaway slaves are allowed to stay free in northern states. No. All new states carved out of the territories are free. No. So we've got 2 and 4. All right, let's see if anybody gave up anything. So did they have to give up power and balance? Nope. Did they have to give up new states joining the Union? Nope. Well, let's start with free states. Let's see if they gave up anything. An end to slavery in the United States. Yeah, that's one thing they gave up. Runaway slaves, enslaved people being allowed to stay free. Oh, they had to give that up. And all new states carved out would be free states. Yep. They had to give that up. Or was it a give up or a change? It did have to change a little, right? So let's give that to them as a change. Okay, so let's look at the slave states. Slavery continues to be legal throughout the United States. Did they have to give that up? No. They wanted all runaway enslaved people to return to them. Did they have to give that up? Nope. And all new states carved out would have to be slave states. Did they have to give that up? No, that's their change. So they gave up, free states gave up 2 things, and slave states gave up nothing. They each had 1 change. What would happen with slavery in the West? That 36-30 line. So then the question is, did the states resolve the moral issue and question of owning people? That means, was there a resolution to whether or not it was okay to own someone else? No. So, looking at this here, was the Missouri Compromise really that much of a compromise? Missouri becomes the 24th state of the United States on August 11, 1821. And I have a little something about that. Our lesson next week, we are going to look at what happened after Missouri became a state. And we are going to go on a final field trip. And we are going to go to First Capitol in St. Charles. There is a picture of it right there. And if you caught on to the date, 1821, that was next year, 200 years ago. And so Missouri has a 200th birthday, or what we call a bicentennial, coming up. And we will learn more about Missouri becoming a state and its first capital on our final field trip and final time together next week. All right, that's it for today. Take care, guys.
Teaching in Room 9 is made possible with support of Bank of America, Dana Brown Charitable Trust, Emerson, and viewers like you.